Close your eyes, let your body sink into rest, and imagine for a moment that the world around you has slowed. The pace of life you know begins to soften, and the noise of the present fades into a quiet hum. You are no longer in the world of rushing clocks, glowing screens, or crowded streets. Instead, you drift into another time, another world, where life moved differently, where every breath and every step felt heavier with the weight of uncertainty. Tonight, we will wander carefully into the past, where humanity faced its darkest hours of sickness and survival, and we will see how life looked and felt in those fragile days. Life long ago was a rhythm of simplicity. There were no machines humming through the night, no endless lights keeping cities awake. When the sun fell, the world dimmed into stillness, yet that stillness did not always bring peace. In the silence, unseen dangers sometimes crept. Illness was one of them. People did not know about germs or viruses, about cells or bacteria. They could not see what spread from one person to the next. All they knew was that sickness arrived suddenly, carried on the breath of a neighbor, the touch of a friend, the water from a well, or the wind that drifted through their window. Imagine the feeling of living in such a world. Each morning you wake to the soft crackle of a fire or the faint crowing of a rooster. You walk through your village or city, where stone streets echo with footsteps and markets buzz with voices. Life feels ordinary, even comforting. But then whispers begin. Someone in the next street has fallen ill. At first, it seems distant, something that happens to others. But soon, the whispers grow louder. A neighbor vanishes from their doorway. A shop closes without warning. The market feels thinner, quieter, and slowly, the invisible presence of disease presses itself into the rhythm of everyday life. In ancient times, pandemics arrived like storms from the horizon, unpredictable, unstoppable, and overwhelming. When they came, life changed not in small ways, but in every way. Streets emptied, voices hushed, doors stayed shut. A city that once felt alive could become eerily silent. Families gathered close together, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. Parents worried for children, and children clung to parents, sensing fear in the air, though they did not always understand why. For many, faith became the anchor in the storm. Without the science to explain what was happening, people looked upward, searching for answers in the heavens. In Rome, during the Antonine plague, people prayed to their gods, leaving offerings at temples, whispering requests for mercy. Centuries later, in Europe during the Black Death, churches filled with soft chanting, bells ringing for funerals, and candles burning in windows as symbols of hope. In the Spanish flu of 1918, when the world had already been torn by war, prayers mingled with the silent resilience of those who endured, not always in churches, but in the quiet of homes, where families leaned on each other for comfort. Life during these pandemics was not only about sickness. It was about waiting for news, waiting for loved ones to recover or not return, waiting for markets to reopen, for children to play again in the fields, for the rhythm of normal life to begin once more. Waiting filled the air like heavy smoke. It pressed down on the spirit, making each hour feel longer, each day stretched thin by the weight of uncertainty. But even in these moments, humanity showed something beautiful. When the world slowed and fear spread, kindness quietly bloomed. Neighbors who had little still shared food. Families told stories by candlelight, passing down legends and songs so children could sleep without fear. Doctors, priests, and healers, though often powerless against the illness, continued to serve, bringing comfort where cures could not. Life was fragile, but life was also resilient. In the stillness of those days, when the sound of laughter grew rare, the soft strength of endurance carried people forward. Imagine yourself there for a moment. The streets are not filled with cars or noise, but with silence. The air feels heavy, and you sense that the world has changed, though you cannot see how. You hear the occasional creak of a cart, the soft cry of a child, the faint tolling of a bell in the distance. These sounds, simple and small, carry more weight than ever because life itself feels uncertain, yet you also hear the gentle hum of a lullaby sung to calm a restless child. You hear the steady voice of someone reading aloud from a sacred text or a cherished story, and you realize that even when sickness shadowed the world, life's quiet moments of love and care still continued. In these pandemics, daily routines transformed. Markets that once bustled with trade grew thin, with only a handful of merchants left. Schools closed, so children learned not from teachers but from parents at home, listening to lessons passed down through memory. Festivals, once filled with color and sound, vanished, leaving only the silence of empty squares. Weddings were postponed, funerals became frequent, and gatherings shrank until families spent most of their time behind closed doors. Life became smaller, centered around the home, around survival, and around the preciousness of simply waking to another day. What must it have felt like to live with such uncertainty, to rise each morning not knowing whether life would continue as it had the day before? For many, the answer was fear, but not only fear. Alongside fear came gratitude for the smallest of things. A loaf of bread shared, a kind word spoken, a sunrise witnessed after a long night. These moments were fragile, but they were also deeply cherished. When so much was lost, what remained gained immeasurable value. As time passed, people learned to adapt. They found ways to keep hope alive. Some turned to prayer, others to song, still others to stories and rituals. In some places, families would carve marks into their doors or hang herbs by their windows, believing it could ward off illness. In others, communities gathered to light candles in the night, creating a glow of shared resilience. These acts may not have cured disease, but they strengthened the human heart, reminding people that even in darkness, they were not entirely alone. And though pandemics often brought silence, they also revealed connection. When cities closed, when streets emptied, people discovered that their greatest source of strength was each other, a hand to hold, a voice to hear, a presence beside them. Even in times when contact was feared, when closeness itself seemed dangerous, the longing for connection never faded. Letters were written, songs were shared from windows. Prayers were spoken in unison, though families were apart. Humanity found ways to remain together, even when the world felt divided by sickness. As you rest now, drifting into the calm of sleep, imagine that you are walking through those ancient streets. The air is cool, the lamps flicker softly, and though the city feels quieter than usual, life still lingers. You see a mother rocking her child to sleep, a father whispering a story, a healer moving quietly from house to house. The world feels fragile, yet it also feels enduring, because even when history's worst pandemics swept across the land, life never truly stopped. It slowed, it shifted, but it carried on. And so, as you listen, you realize that history is not only about loss, but about survival. About the quiet persistence of ordinary people who endured extraordinary times. About the strength found in silence, the hope held in small acts, and the resilience that carried humanity forward, century after century. Life during history's worst pandemics was not easy, not bright, and not certain, but it was life, and within it, seeds of endurance, kindness, and hope grew stronger than ever before. Close your eyes now, and let these thoughts settle gently in your mind. The past was heavy, but it also teaches us that even in darkness, there is always light, always resilience, always the quiet strength to continue. Let your breathing soften, let your body rest, and drift peacefully, carrying with you the knowledge that humanity has always endured and always will. Imagine yourself drifting back almost 2,000 years to the heart of the Roman Empire. The year is around 165, and the empire is vast, stretching from the deserts of Egypt to the green hills of Britain, from the rivers of Mesopotamia to the coastlines of Spain. Rome is alive with trade, power, and confidence. Its legions guard the borders, its cities bustle with markets, theaters, and temples, and its citizens feel as though the empire might last forever. But beneath this grandeur, something invisible begins to stir, something that would silence the busy streets and bring fear even to the strongest soldiers. This was the Antonine Plague, one of history's earliest pandemics to strike a mighty empire. At first, life seemed ordinary. Imagine yourself walking along a Roman street. The smell of baked bread drifts from a small shop. Merchants call out their wares in the crowded forum. Children run through narrow alleys, their laughter echoing against the stone walls. Soldiers march past, their armor glinting in the sunlight, their sandals striking the ground in rhythm. Nothing seems unusual, nothing seems threatening, and yet, far away, in the camps of the Roman army, something unseen has already begun its spread. The plague is believed to have started with soldiers returning from campaigns in the East. They carried not just memories of battle, not just treasures and stories, but an illness no one understood. It began with fever, with chills, with weakness. At first, perhaps a soldier simply thought he was tired from the march, but then others fell sick. Camps that were once filled with the sounds of orders and drills grew quiet, replaced by coughing, by groans, by the uneasy whispers of men who knew something was wrong. They had fought enemies in battle, but this enemy had no face, no weapon, no clear way to fight back. As the soldiers moved, the sickness moved with them. Soon it reached the towns and cities of the empire. A Roman market that once echoed with laughter and the bartering of goods began to thin out. Shutters closed over doorways. Neighbors avoided one another. In homes lit by small oil lamps, families huddled together, wondering if illness would enter their own door. No one knew how it spread. Some thought it was the anger of the gods, a punishment for sins left unatoned. Others thought it drifted through the very air, invisible yet deadly. With no answers, fear itself spread as quickly as the disease. Imagine the feeling of waking each morning, uncertain of who might be gone by nightfall. The baker you saw yesterday no longer opens his shop. The friend you greeted at the baths does not return. The voices in the street grow fewer, replaced by silence. Even the sound of carts carrying the sick or the dead becomes something you learn to recognize and dread. The empire that once felt eternal now feels fragile. Even the great city of Rome, filled with monuments and power, cannot escape the touch of this invisible shadow. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself witnessed this devastation. He was not only a ruler but a philosopher, a man who believed in endurance, in calmness, in meeting hardship with dignity, yet even he could not stop the plague. His writings, filled with reflections on strength and mortality, carry the weight of a man watching his empire suffer. Imagine his thoughts as he looked out over Rome, knowing that his legions weakened, that his citizens grew fearful, that the empire's very strength seemed threatened by something too small to see. His calm words of philosophy were like soft lanterns in the darkness, offering guidance even when no cure could be found. Life during the Antonine Plague was marked by waiting, by uncertainty. Families spent more time indoors, keeping close together. Festivals, once full of color and music, grew fewer or were marked by somber tones. Theaters where actors performed plays for eager audiences became places of risk, where crowds could no longer gather safely. The famous Roman baths, once the heart of social life, grew quieter as people feared the closeness of others. Imagine the echo of dripping water in a great marble hall where only a handful of bathers remain, their voices hushed, their eyes wary. And yet, even in this time, life did not completely stop. People still cooked meals, still shared stories, still whispered prayers to the gods they hoped might protect them. In small gardens, herbs were gathered, mixed into remedies that might ease suffering, even if they could not cure. Mothers still rocked children to sleep. Fathers still told stories of Rome's greatness, hoping to inspire courage. In temples, priests lit incense, the smoke rising into the air like fragile threads of hope. Humanity, even under the shadow of sickness, found ways to endure. The plague did not only bring sickness, it brought change. The Roman army, once nearly invincible, struggled to recruit new soldiers as so many fell ill. Farms lacked workers and harvests grew smaller. Trade slowed as merchants feared travel and cities closed their gates. Imagine the vast empire, once connected by bustling roads and busy ships, now quieter, its lifelines thinned by fear. An empire that prided itself on order and strength now felt the fragility that illness revealed. The Antonine plague was not only a health crisis, it was a reminder that even the strongest civilization could be humbled by forces it could not control. Picture for a moment the home of an ordinary Roman family during this time. A small house, its walls decorated with simple paintings, its floor scattered with clay pots and tools. The family sits together by the flickering light of a lamp. Outside, the streets are quieter than usual. Inside, the family whispers about neighbors who have fallen ill. They share bread, though food is scarcer than before. The children ask questions their parents cannot answer. Will the sickness come here? Will the gods protect them? The parents offer comfort, though their own hearts are uncertain. And so, night by night, they wait, hoping each dawn brings another day of survival. The plague also brought the empire closer to thoughts of mortality. Death, which had always been part of life, became something more present, more pressing. Cemeteries filled, funeral pyres burned. The air carried not only the scent of bread and wine, but also the heavy smoke of mourning. And yet, with each loss, families clung even tighter to those who remained. Every meal shared became precious. Every conversation became deeper. When life felt fragile, it was cherished more deeply. Imagine walking through Rome at twilight during the height of the plague. The setting sun paints the sky in soft orange and purple. The streets are not empty, but they are quieter. Doors are shut. Curtains are drawn. A priest walks slowly toward a temple, carrying a small bowl of incense. A cart rolls by, its wheels creaking, carrying someone too weak to walk. A mother sings softly to her child from an open window, her voice carrying into the street like a thread of comfort. The empire feels wounded, but in these small, ordinary moments, you see that life still persists. As the years passed, the Antonine plague continued to return in waves. It did not vanish quickly. It came and went, sometimes fading, sometimes returning with force. Each time, people learned again to adapt, to endure. They planted fields when they could. They reopened markets when it felt safe. They found joy in moments of calm between the storms. And though many lives were lost, many also survived, carrying forward the memory of those dark days. Their resilience became part of the empire's story, woven into its history as a reminder of both vulnerability and strength. For those who lived through it, the Antonine plague was not just an event in history. It was daily life, stretching across years. It was the silence of empty streets, the fear of a knock at the door, the warmth of family gathered close, the prayers whispered into the night. It was uncertainty, but it was also endurance. Even as the empire trembled, even as fear spread, people continued to live, to hope, to find meaning in the smallest of things. Drift now into the 14th century, when Europe stood at the edge of a darkness it had never known before. Life before the plague was full of familiar rhythms. In villages, the day began with the crow of a rooster, the scent of wood smoke rising from chimneys, and the sound of bells ringing from small churches. In cities, narrow streets bustled with traders calling out their goods, with children weaving between carts, and with craftsmen shaping tools, shoes, and cloth. Life was not easy, but it was steady. People planted crops, raised animals, prayed in churches, and celebrated holy days with feasts and music. There was hardship, but also joy. People married, danced, told stories, and believed in a world guided by faith. It was a time when community meant survival, when neighbors leaned on one another to endure harsh winters and poor harvests. But into this world of ordinary struggles and ordinary joys came a shadow unlike any before. The Black Death, as it would later be called, began its quiet approach far from Europe, carried along trade routes, moving invisibly across land and sea. At first, it was only a whisper, a rumor of illness in faraway lands, a story told by merchants who had traveled long distances. Few paid much attention. After all, sickness had always been part of life. A fever, a cough, a sudden chill, these were familiar enemies, but this sickness was different. It spread faster, struck harder, and carried with it a fear so heavy it would reshape the world. Imagine the first signs of it reaching a small European town. Perhaps a trader arrives, weary from his journey. He looks tired, but travel is exhausting, so no one thinks much of it. The next day he is gone, overcome by fever. Soon his family begins to cough, to sweat, to cry out in pain. Neighbors, who once greeted one another in the street with warmth, now begin to look away, crossing to the other side. And then, like ripples spreading across a pond, the illness moves from house to house, street to street, until the town itself feels quiet, subdued, waiting. In larger cities, the change was even more striking. London, Paris, Florence, great centers of trade and culture, grew quieter by the day. Imagine walking down a once busy street in Florence. The air still carries the smell of bread baking and meat roasting, but the crowds are gone. Doors are shut, curtains are drawn, the sound of laughter from taverns has been replaced by the tolling of church bells, ringing again and again to mark the passing of lives. Funeral processions move slowly through the streets, and the sight of them becomes so common that people stop turning their heads to look. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. Death becomes part of the daily rhythm. Life during the Black Death was not simply about sickness. It was about fear and uncertainty. No one knew how the plague spread. Some thought it drifted through the air, carried by foul smells. Others thought it was punishment from God, a reckoning for sins committed by society. Some believed it was written in the stars, foretold by strange alignments in the heavens. Without answers, fear deepened. Families closed their doors and barred their windows. Neighbors no longer gathered in squares. Markets emptied, schools closed. The rhythms of daily life broke apart, leaving people to live in isolation, their days marked by silence and worry. Imagine being a child during this time. You once played in the fields with friends, laughed in the streets, and watched festivals with wide eyes. Now you remain indoors, listening to the whispers of your parents, catching glimpses of their worried faces. You hear the bells tolling each day, sometimes so often that they seem to blend together into a single, endless sound. You ask questions, but answers are vague, softened to protect your heart. All you know is that the world feels different, heavier, lonelier, and yet, even in this darkness, life did not completely stop. Families still gathered around fires at night, telling stories to calm their children, sharing meals even if the food was simple and scarce. In monasteries, monks continued to pray, their voices rising in chant, seeking mercy and hope. In small villages, neighbors sometimes braved their fear to bring food to those who could not leave their homes. Kindness flickered, even when fear pressed hard against it. Humanity's light, though dimmed, did not go out. The plague touched not only the body, but also the spirit. For many, faith became both a comfort and a question. Churches were filled with those seeking answers, yet at the same time, the loss of priests and monks to the plague left some feeling abandoned. Some turned to processions, carrying crosses through the streets, singing hymns in desperate hope that God would show mercy. Others turned inward, praying quietly at home, lighting candles, and asking for protection. And still others questioned everything, wondering how a loving God could allow such suffering. Faith was tested, but it was also a thread that held many together when all else seemed to unravel. Daily life became smaller, focused on survival. Instead of gathering in markets or feasts, families tended to their own gardens, if they had them, or rationed what little food remained. Trade slowed, but in homes, small tasks continued. Bread still had to be baked, clothes still mended, water still carried from wells. The small acts of daily survival became the anchors of life, keeping people grounded even as the world outside felt unstable. Imagine walking through a small village at dusk during the plague. The sky is painted in shades of red and gold, but the streets are almost empty. A dog barks in the distance. A window creaks open as someone peers out, then quickly closes again. A faint smell of smoke drifts from a chimney where a family cooks their simple meal. Somewhere, a voice sings softly, perhaps a lullaby, perhaps a prayer. The world feels changed, yet in these ordinary sounds, there is still life, still hope, still resilience. The Black Death left scars, but it also revealed strength. Communities learned to value the bonds of family more deeply. Survivors carried forward the memory of those lost, but they also carried forward lessons about endurance. Life had been shaken, but it had not ended. Out of the silence and fear, people began slowly to rebuild, to gather again, to find joy in small things. The laughter of children returned to fields. Bells once again rang for weddings and baptisms, not only for funerals. Markets reopened, and though the memory of the plague lingered, life found its way back. Close your eyes and let us drift back just a little more than a century, to a world at the end of a long war. It is the year 1918, and the First World War has stretched across continents, leaving families grieving, soldiers weary, and nations exhausted. But even as people begin to hope that peace might return, another shadow rises, quieter but no less devastating. It does not arrive with guns or bombs, but with a cough, a fever, a weariness that spreads swiftly from one person to another. This shadow is the influenza pandemic that would come to be known as the Spanish flu. It moved with startling speed, touching nearly every part of the world, and shaping the lives of millions in ways they could never forget. Imagine the world at that moment. Cities are alive with industry, with factories running day and night, with trains carrying goods and passengers, with trams rattling through crowded streets. Soldiers returning from the front step off ships and trains, greeted by families relieved to see them again. Newspapers print headlines of treaties, battles, and hopes for peace. The rhythm of life is beginning to shift from war back to something more ordinary. And yet, quietly, the flu begins to spread. At first, it seems like any other illness, a cough here, a fever there. People are used to colds and influenza. These are not new words, not new experiences. But then it becomes clear that this sickness is different. It strikes harder, faster, and with greater cruelty than expected. A healthy young person, strong and vibrant in the morning, might be bedridden by nightfall. Families watch in confusion and fear as loved ones weaken suddenly, their breathing labored, their skin sometimes tinged with blue. The familiar comfort of knowing that a cold will pass is replaced with the realization that this illness does not follow familiar rules. The flu travels with the soldiers, carried across countries and oceans, moving along the same routes that had carried war. Camps, trains, and ships become places where it spreads quickly, silently, invisibly. And then when soldiers return home, it comes with them, slipping into towns and villages, into busy cities and quiet farms alike. Within weeks, communities across the world feel its presence. Streets that were alive with celebration of the wars end now quiet once more, not from gunfire, but from the heavy hush of sickness. Imagine walking through a city like New York or London in the autumn of 1918. The streets are not empty, but they look different. Many people wear cloth masks across their faces, some homemade, some provided by health officials. Schools have closed their doors. Theaters are shuttered, concerts canceled, gatherings forbidden. Notices are posted on walls, warning people to avoid crowds, to cover their mouths when they cough, to wash their hands with care. What was once ordinary, sharing a laugh at a pub, sitting shoulder to shoulder in a crowded tram, filling a church pew, suddenly feels dangerous, something to be avoided. Inside homes, families adapt. Parents keep children indoors, creating games to occupy them while the world outside grows quieter. Meals are shared in silence, the worry hanging in the air even heavier than the smell of cooking. Letters are written more often, as families separated by distance long for news. The arrival of the mail brings both relief and fear. Relief at a letter from a loved one, fear that it may carry the words of loss. Radios and newspapers carry updates, their reports often grim, their warnings repeated again and again. Hospitals fill quickly. Doctors and nurses work tirelessly, moving from bed to bed, their faces weary but determined. Supplies run short. Beds are scarce. In some places, schools and churches are converted into makeshift hospitals, their halls filled with rows of cots where the sick lie side by side. Volunteers step forward to help, bringing food, tending to patients, comforting the dying. The sound of coughing, of labored breathing, of whispered prayers fills these spaces, and yet, amid the exhaustion, there is also courage, ordinary people doing their best in extraordinary times. The Spanish flu was not only a sickness of the body, it was also a test of spirit. People longed for normal life, for the simple comfort of gathering without fear. Weddings were postponed, funerals conducted quietly with few mourners, holidays passed with less celebration, replaced by cautious prayers for survival. Communities that had just endured years of war now faced another battle, not with weapons but with endurance, and still they carried on. Imagine a small town in the countryside. The fields are golden with harvest, but fewer hands are there to gather it. Families who once joined together to celebrate the season now remain apart, each household keeping to itself. The church bells still ring, but often they toll for funerals rather than festivals. At night, families sit by lamplight, telling stories, knitting, writing letters. The world feels smaller, confined to the walls of home, but within those walls, life continues. Bread is baked, songs are sung, children are comforted. The ordinary rhythms of life become acts of quiet resistance against despair. Children, as always, adapt in their own ways. They invent games with what they have, turn chores into adventures, and find laughter even in small things. Their resilience brings moments of light to households heavy with worry. A child's giggle, a spontaneous dance, a question asked with innocence. These small moments remind families that life, even in the shadow of illness, still holds beauty. The flu touched every part of society. Politicians debated how to respond. Newspapers sometimes downplayed the danger, hoping to avoid panic, while at other times they filled their pages with warnings. Communities passed laws requiring masks, closing public spaces, fining those who ignored safety measures. Some resisted, believing the restrictions unnecessary, while others complied, desperate for protection. These tensions mirrored the struggles within households, the longing for normalcy against the fear of risk, the pull of freedom against the weight of caution. And yet, despite disagreements and fear, communities found ways to help one another. Neighbors delivered food to families too sick to shop. Women's groups sewed masks and clothing for hospitals. Priests and ministers, though often overwhelmed, continued to visit homes, offering prayers and comfort. The flu revealed not only vulnerability, but also compassion. In the face of sickness, humanity's instinct to care for one another endured. Imagine, once again, the city streets during this time. The sound of horse hooves and tram bells still fills the air, but fewer people walk the sidewalks. Those who do move quickly, their scarves or masks covering their faces. A shopkeeper sets out his goods, but sees only a trickle of customers. Theaters, usually alive with music and laughter, stand dark and silent. And yet, in some windows, you see candles glowing. Families light them at night, small beacons of warmth, symbols of resilience. The world feels altered, but within each home, life carries on. Across the centuries, through the rise and fall of empires, through wars and revolutions, through discoveries and inventions, there runs a thread woven quietly into human history. It is the thread of how people have lived through pandemics, of how they have carried themselves when the air was heavy with fear and the days stretched long with uncertainty. Though the names of the illnesses changed, though the years and the faces were different, there was always something shared, something deeply human that connected them all. When sickness came, the first change was always the slowing of life. Streets that once echoed with the shouts of vendors and the laughter of children began to grow quieter. Markets thinned, theaters emptied, celebrations were postponed. The rhythm of daily living shifted into something smaller, more cautious. What once seemed ordinary, gathering with neighbors, embracing friends, filling squares with noise and color, suddenly felt dangerous, something to be feared. And so the world drew inwards. Families spent more time at home. Villages and cities that had been alive with movement seemed to hold their breath, waiting. In that waiting, fear lived, not always spoken aloud, not always shouted or named, but carried silently in the hearts of people. Fear of what might come in the night, fear of whether the next cough, the next fever, would strike a loved one, fear of whether the world would ever feel the same again. That fear was not bound to one century or one people. It was shared by those in Rome during the Antonine plague, by families in Europe during the Black Death, by soldiers and children during the Spanish flu, and by countless others in countless places. The names changed, but the feeling was the same, and yet, alongside fear came resilience. Always, in every age, people found ways to carry on. The shape of life changed, but its essence endured. Families cooked together, even if the meals were simpler. Stories were told by candlelight, whispered to children so they might sleep without worry. Songs were sung softly, prayers spoken, rituals kept alive. A mother rocking her child in a Roman villa, a father telling a folktale in a plague-stricken village, a nurse humming quietly to a patient in a crowded ward during the Spanish flu. These moments, though separated by centuries, are bound by the same thread of endurance. There was also the thread of kindness. Even when fear pressed people apart, kindness found ways to reach across. Neighbors shared food when supplies were low. Strangers nursed the sick when families could not. Communities sewed masks, baked bread, carried water, lit candles. These small acts, though often unnoticed in the grand telling of history, were the sparks that kept hope alive. When the world seemed darker than ever, these lights glowed quietly, reminders that humanity's greatest strength is not only in surviving, but in caring. Think of the ways people have reached for connection in times of isolation. In ancient Rome, letters carried words of comfort across distances. During the Black Death, voices rose in song from behind closed doors. Hymns shared not in crowded churches but in quiet homes. In 1918, Families wrote long letters to soldiers far away, filling them with love and encouragement. And always, people found ways to speak to one another, to remind each other that no one was entirely alone. Even when touch was feared, even when distance was necessary, the longing for connection created new forms of closeness. Another thread is the way life itself, even in its smallest forms, became more precious. A meal shared, a sunrise witnessed, a child's laugh, the sound of rain on a roof. These moments, which might have passed unnoticed in ordinary times, became treasures when the world felt uncertain. People learned to cherish the ordinary, to find beauty in simplicity. In every pandemic, we see the same pattern. When so much is taken, what remains becomes sacred. The rhythm of grief was also a shared experience. Bells tolling in Europe, funeral pyres burning in Rome, quiet memorials held during the Spanish flu, all echoed with the weight of loss. Yet grief was never the only sound. Alongside it came the rhythm of survival. The planting of seeds in spring, the baking of bread, the telling of stories, the laughter that returned after tears. Grief and endurance walked together, hand in hand, through every age. And always, when the darkness passed, people rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, with scars and memories, but with determination, streets filled again, children played once more, songs returned to festivals, and bells rang for weddings and celebrations. Life was altered, but not ended. Each time, humanity emerged changed but still enduring, carrying forward both the pain of loss and the strength of survival. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the quiet similarities. A Roman mother praying by a small household altar, an English villager lighting a candle during the Black Death, an American family writing a letter during the Spanish flu. Different languages, different rituals, different centuries, yet the same human heart beating beneath. Fear, hope, grief, love, resilience, these are the common threads woven through every pandemic in history. When we look back across the long arc of history, when we let our minds drift through the ages and pause at the moments when sickness swept across the earth, we begin to see not only how fragile life can be, but also how endlessly resilient it is. Each pandemic brought with it fear and sorrow, but also lessons, quiet reminders of what it means to be human, what it means to endure, what it means to hope. These lessons, though born in different centuries, still whisper to us today, as if carried across time by the voices of those who lived before us. The first lesson is one of humility. For all our inventions, for all our discoveries, for all the power we believe we hold, nature has always reminded us of its strength. A tiny germ, unseen by the naked eye, could halt armies, silence cities, and humble kings. In Rome, emperors bowed to the power of a plague they could not command. In medieval Europe, castles and cottages alike were touched by the same invisible hand. In the early 20th century, with trains, ships, and factories humming, humanity still found itself quieted by influenza. Again and again, we are reminded that we are not separate from the natural world but part of it, bound to its rhythms, subject to its mysteries. This humility does not diminish us, rather it grounds us, reminding us that our place is not above creation, but within it. Another lesson is that even in times of fear, people turn toward one another. Though illness has often forced separation, though distance has been necessary for safety, the human heart has always found its way back to connection. Letters, songs, prayers, small acts of kindness, all became bridges when physical closeness was impossible. History shows us that while sickness may isolate bodies, it cannot fully sever the bonds of love and community. Again and again, we see families holding fast, neighbors caring for one another, strangers offering compassion. The lesson is clear. Our greatest strength has never been in standing alone, but in reaching for one another, even when hands cannot touch. There is also the lesson of adaptability. Life has a way of reshaping itself when circumstances demand it. In Rome, festivals were altered, rituals adjusted. During the Black Death, communities learned new ways of farming, trading, and worshiping. During the Spanish flu, schools and churches became hospitals. Homes became classrooms, and the simplest routines of daily life were reinvented. Each time, people proved that though the world may change suddenly, the human spirit can bend without breaking. This adaptability is not only a survival skill, it is a quiet creativity, a reminder that even in difficulty, there is room for invention and growth. We also learn the lesson of gratitude. In the face of uncertainty, the small details of life become precious. A warm loaf of bread, a song hummed by a child, the return of laughter after silence, all take on greater meaning when the future feels fragile. Across history, people living through pandemics learned to cherish the ordinary, to see beauty in the simplest things. And when the darkness passed, they carried that gratitude with them, holding on to a deeper appreciation for life's fleeting, fragile moments. Grief, too, has been a teacher. Every pandemic left behind empty chairs at tables, voices missing from conversations, names remembered with longing. Yet grief, painful as it is, shaped people into communities bound by memory and resilience. It taught them compassion, for they knew what it meant to lose. It taught them patience, for healing is never quick. It taught them to honor the past, to carry forward the love of those who were gone. Grief did not vanish when the illness faded. It lived on in stories, in traditions, in the ways communities chose to rebuild. And from that grief came a kind of wisdom, quiet but enduring. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that life goes on. Again and again, humanity has faced darkness, and again, light has returned. After the Antonine plague, Rome endured. After the Black Death, Europe flourished anew. After the Spanish flu, communities danced and sang again. Each time, the scars remained, but so did the strength. The lesson is not only that we can survive, but that we can grow, that even from sorrow, new beginnings can take root. If you close your eyes and imagine all those who came before, you can almost hear their voices carrying across time. A Roman soldier whispering words of encouragement to his family. A mother in a medieval village singing a lullaby despite the sorrow around her. A nurse in 1918 offering comfort to a patient in a crowded ward. Their voices joined together, speaking the same truth. You are not alone, and this too shall pass. It is a chorus of endurance, a song of resilience that has echoed through every age. As we reflect on these lessons, we see that they are not confined to the past. They live with us now, guiding us still. Whenever fear rises, whenever uncertainty clouds the future, we can remember that humanity has walked this path before. We can draw strength from the knowledge that countless others have faced the same darkness and found their way through it. Their stories are not distant history. They are reminders of who we are, of what we carry within us. Good night and sleep well. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos.